There's 50 ways to leave your lover. Today on the Manspace. Welcome to the Manspace podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. Welcome, Spacemen. See how I did that, Mike? Last time what happened was, when I watched your thing to edit it, you did this thing, and you and Matt were both so proud of you for doing this little intro thing that Matt was like, nice. And then with the welcome came like 20 minutes later.
Well, that's the thing. Matt even thought he's like, no, we already did the welcome. And I thought, no, we did the intro.
He said, we did the welcome. He's like, well, I mean, I did nice.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that's what you did. Hey, the patron saint of the Manspace.
Mm-hmm.
On YouTube, he suggested that we have a Manspace retreat that sounds like we purchased land and dice it up into 6 parcels. And he's like, well, 4 of those are already taken. The 3 of us plus him.
Because the patron saint of the Manspace.
Well, I feel like, well, if you're the patron saint, are you paying for those parcels? Maybe all the tons of money we'll make off of merchandising. Yeah, That's going to go real far. I need to start doing that.
That's Jenner needs to show us the website she's talked about.
Show us the way.
Because then all we have to do is design it.
Hey, well, that's easy. We already have a logo design. Hey, you know what I look like when I wear these things?
The dude from Star Wars?
Yeah, like that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So those of you who aren't on, I can't get it to sit right. Sorry, if you're not on YouTube, you can't see how good this looks. What does he do? He's just typing.
Yeah. Now, if you flip it the other way,
I'm a dude from Star Trek.
Then you're the dude from Star Trek.
Or I just look like a moron who's about to walk into a wall. Probably
Again,
both.
The guy from Star Trek.
Did you watch Community all the way through?
No.
Well, you're missing out. Well, I don't know. Season 5 and 6, you're like, what's happening here? It's still funny, but it's like everything kind of ended at season 4 and Troy leaves, and Troy's hilarious. And Chevy Chase left, obviously probably got freaking booted because everyone hated him. But at some point, Troy, one of the things that Chevy Chase does to try to mess with everybody is when he's dying, he gives everybody these like gifts before they're dying. And the gift he gives to Troy is that he gets to meet his childhood hero, LeVar. Is it LeVar Burton?
Yeah.
And he's like, Troy just spends the whole time.
I have seen that episode.
Yeah. In stunned silence. He's like, ah! And at the end, when he's supposed to sail off on a boat around the world, and when what's his name actually dies, Chevy Chase actually dies, he sails around the world with LeVar Burton. It's like, it's so funny. All I know is that guy reminds me of being sick. Because that's when
that's true. Yeah, because
Reading Rainbow would
watch
come
it
on.
when you're sick. Yeah.
Yeah, freaking hated that show when
So-
it came on.
Did you hear this thing that Donald Glover said?
No.
So he was presenting at the BET Awards, and he said,
So on my screen, Mike is gone.
"Oh, really?
Oh,
That's all you. You've frozen like 2 times.
Were you talking in there?
Just now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been talking.
I didn't hear any of that. Tell me what Donald Glover says.
Okay. Anyway, so Donald Glover at the BET Awards says, this isn't personal, but I just feel like I should have more BET Awards than Sam Smith. I'm serious. It's the Black Entertainment Television Awards. How much more entertaining do I have to do? Because it's just the math of the fact. It doesn't really make sense. I have more Grammys than Will Smith, which makes no sense, but I have the same amount of BET Awards as Sam Smith. Does that make sense to you guys? Me and Sam Smith are neck and neck at the Black Entertainment Awards.
That Donald
I
Glover,
freaking
man.
love Donald Glover.
He's such a fascinating dude.
Oh, he's like he's so like multi-talented. It's ridiculous.
I mean, many people consider me multi-talented. I can host a podcast. I can tell jokes. Sometimes I sing and stuff. I was just watching videos of my final show from my band. For those of you who are
You
wondering,
have
on YouTube, the whole show is on YouTube.
shut up, really?
Type in button hooked, 2 different words, final show. Maybe I'll link that in the show notes.
You should.
You can watch the whole thing from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, almost exactly.
Man, 20 years ago.
It's like the part where Ryan was all mad at me because I called for our own encore. It's because he's like, well, you got to tell him this is the last song, but then we'll come back out. And I was like, all right, guys, this is the last song. And I'm like winking. I was like, but if you guys wanted us to come back, I mean, I'm not saying we'd say no to that, because we hadn't played we had a pretty standard set, and we hadn't played the last 3 songs. So it was like, so before we even got out, Ryan's like, let's just go back on. You ruined it, Rob. I love the idea that I just like telling people I called for my own encore. Do you guys want me back? I better come back. You guys probably want me to come sing one more song, right? I'll come do one more. You're welcome, everybody. Here comes Rob with another song. What can't I do? Me and Donald Glover are about the same. I should probably have some BET awards.
I think I think that's I think that's another thing Billy Joel doesn't do.
Call for his own encore?
He doesn't.
I don't know that anybody does.
I'm sure he doesn't do that. He doesn't do opening acts. Like he doesn't.
Oh.
There's never an opening for him. It's just him. And I don't think he does encores. Like, actually, he plays until he's done.
Yeah.
I think he's just done.
The last 2 shows I went to, when I took my kids to see the Wonder Years, the first album, it was a tour for one of their albums, The Greatest Generation, and they said the first chunk was just that album. And then they said, hey, look, we're gonna take a break and come back. And then when they came back, they said, you're getting 2 full sets. And they said, there will be no encore. The second set is the encore. Like, it was a whole set. And then the second show I went to was Stuart Hot Water Music. They just finished, and I was like, huh, they just walked off. And the lights came up. I was like, oh, I'm so used to encores that it's like, and part of me is like, I don't like the encore thing. This feels like just play the thing and be done. I don't I feel like, okay, cool. But when people start chanting for one more song, it feels like standing ovations at this point. This just feels like a dumb formality we do, that now standing ovation means nothing because 3rd graders get
right.
Them.
Yeah. No, the number of times people will start standing up and I'm like, oh, this is like you guys thought it was that good?
Yeah. And I refuse. And I feel like a jerk. It's like me not tipping pizza delivery guys. There you go.
The funny thing is, I don't want to talk because I'm like, he's still talking, probably, and I don't want to talk over you.
I'll clip these. It's fine.
So I just don't say anything.
So here's what we're going to do today. Now that I'm back. I say that like people were like, where's Rob? I didn't listen to that episode. Rob wasn't on it. Rob. We're talking about 50 ways to leave your lover. We're going to tell you all the ways you can leave your lover. Or, since we're probably not going to do that, we're going to talk about an article that Mike found from just recently. A psychologist reveals 6 signs a marriage may end in divorce. First of all, let's just start with this title. It sort of bothers me. It feels like 6 signs of a marriage may end in divorce. It feels very non-committal while also being very committal at the same time. Mm-hmm. But I will say what they did do was they said a classic. I feel like that's not the right word to use there. I feel like they wanted to use like seminal, maybe.
Yeah.
A classic 1997 study published in the Journal of Marriage and Family analyzed over a decade's worth of data from thousands of married couples to figure out the top causes of divorce. They came up with 6, which are explained below. I guess Mark Travers is the psychologist, and he's revealing.
Is he? I didn't think he was.
It says Mark Travers, contributor.
Oh, yeah,
I write about the
contributor.
world of psychology. Who doesn't at this point, Mark Travers? No offense, Mark. You're probably a great
everybody
dude, actually.
does.
So what we're going to do today, I think, because this is something that I thought about this morning, talking with a client about how these are the kind of commonly top-cited reasons for divorce that people have heard before, like sex, money, and in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
And telling my client, it's not really that. That's just what people cite. And the same thing is true here with these 6. I feel like, that's not really what the issue is. That's just what people are writing down. But the fact that he wrote it as the top causes of divorce, it makes it sound like this will cause divorce. In some of these cases, I'd say this is a symptom of something else.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them I could say, that's really going to be it's hard to overcome that. Most couples I've seen, or many couples I've seen, will get divorced in that context. So, without further ado, I said that wrong because that makes it sound like I'm saying goodbye. Remember that movie, Much Ado About Nothing?
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Remember how bad Keanu Reeves was at acting? And still is, but he's found he knows his place. He's like, I just know how to stay in my lane. I will be John Wick forevermore.
Mm-hmm. Except they killed him in the last movie, so.
Did they, though?
Yep.
Did they, though? Aren't they making more?
I mean, if the rumor is true, then no, they didn't. But originally, yes, they did.
They're not. They're totally leaving it wide open so they can have Fast and the Furious 17. All right. Let's start with time check with number 1. Pause for dramatic effect. And go. Cheating / infidelity, which is a side note. It always makes me chuckle, I guess, when people refer to it as adultery. I don't know why. I guess I feel like, let's just call it infidelity, would you? Or like the time I did a presentation on this. Huh?
I can't think of the last time I heard someone call it adultery.
It's usually someone who's religious. I don't think they separate out the two. And they're thinking, thou shalt not commit this thing. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything cool I just said. But
well, your internet sucks today. Just saying.
Mine says I'm at 99%. It wouldn't be an episode of the Manspace if we didn't talk about internet problems. What can't I do? The internet.
We didn't talk about it last week when you weren't here.
Shut your face. You did too. I heard you talk about how you guys are at 99%.
That's true. We talked about how we had no problems because you weren't here.
Here I am at 99%.
I know, but you're here and we have problems again. I'm just saying.
Who's the host, Mike?
You.
Still me. Yeah, I know. I don't know. Fine. Here we go. Cheating and infidelity. Okay. Here's what's interesting about. Well, tell me this. Ooh, I feel like I want to do a quick research. Do you think, how big of a predictor of divorce is that, or cause, would you say?
My guess is probably less than 25%.
Probably less than 25, you said?
Yeah. Like I'm thinking about it, and I think of all of the divorced people I've worked with, or all of the people who end up going through divorce, or couples I've worked with, cheating and infidelity is not usually the issue.
Right.
And so I think, 1 in 4 is probably generous.
Yeah, I feel like the reason I asked the question, I wanted to do some quick research, is because I thought I'd recognize that my sample pool is biased because I see people who are there working on it, and I feel like most of them work through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, yeah, I don't. I'd put it around maybe 25%, where it's like, yeah, I don't think you guys are coming back from this. But according to this quick research, it says, and there's some stuff that would support this, but some sources, 20 to 45% of marriages are affected by infidelity. Of those, 40 to 80%, which is a huge range, where one or both have had an affair, end in divorce.
Notice the caveat, though.
One or
Where
both?
one
What?
or both have had an affair.
Well, yes.
Which I'll bet
But
if both of them have had an affair, the chances of divorce go way up.
well, and this is not necessarily. I've actually worked with couples where both have had multiple couples where both have had affairs, and some couples feel like it kind of
Balances things.
yeah, it's like, well, we both did this. Now let's figure out what's really going on. I've seen some where they think it's going to balance. Like I've seen some specifically where she has said, go cheat, which is funny because it's like, well, it's not really cheating anymore as soon as you say that.
Right. Now you've given him permission.
Yeah, now it's just a hall pass. But here's what I think is funny about this one. Whenever you ask people and listeners, I mean, space people, I'm being very inclusive today. You can go poll your friends and see what they say about this. And I will guarantee you'll get two answers if you ask the question, what are your deal breakers in a marriage? And the two answers will be either cheating or specifically you're asking a female, if he hits me, if there's been violence. What's interesting about that to me is I tell people all the time, that's what everybody says until it actually happens. And then it's so complicated, or you've been together so long, or you have kids, or you have whatever, that it's like, these aren't really deal breakers. They are massive seismic shifts
Hurdles
in the relationship. Yeah. But I don't think they are deal breakers automatically. And I don't think, and this is what this number one thing, I think that the issue I take with it, I don't think that the issue, I think cheating or infidelity is a symptom generally of the problem that actually leads to divorce more than it is the thing. So like, I didn't know this was Paul Amato, who did that study in 1997. Old Paul, old Pablo. Okay. Too much, move on. So like this talks about a profound sense of emotional betrayal. But what I think the issue is, anytime I work with infidelity, is saying, hey, something was off in your relationship to begin with. Like, how did we get to this point? The tricky part, and for our listeners to clarify this too, the tricky part when I say that is it can sound like I'm saying, well, if you had been a better husband, or if you had been a more attentive wife or something like that, then this wouldn't have happened.
This wouldn't have happened.
Right. Which is false, because then it sounds like I'm blaming the infidelity on the cheatee.
Yeah.
That's a word, right?
Is now.
Remember that? This is that presentation I did. You weren't there for it. Dave was with me. We were on a panel, and this other woman kept describing, I think I've told you this story before. She kept describing the cheater as infidels because, who was it? Snyder or Bauckham, one of the two, who's written these books, Getting Past the Affair. They would often refer to people as infidels. And I was like, I'm sorry. At some point I said, I was like, I shouldn't have done that because I just totally shot her credibility. But I said, all I can think when you said is death to all infidels. But the cheatee, I wouldn't want to place, I don't do this in my office. I think if you cheated, I need you to take responsibility for this. But the issue is not the cheating. I mean, don't get me wrong there either. It is a huge issue. But there is another issue that we have to look at, is to say, how come you guys got distant? When did you stop talking? When did you stop feeling close and intimate?
Yeah, when did these shift? Now, there are times, and I think this is, like I remember working with someone, and it had been like what this guy brought in to the marriage had been a problem prior to them getting married.
Yeah.
And he simply brought it in. And I think, yeah, that's a little different.
Sure.
Right. Because that's like, that was something he brought with him as opposed to them getting distant. But I think you're right. Like, there, it is like, all right, so what's going on? Right. Like,
Yeah.
what's the
Right.
reason that this is where you end up? And it's the same, like, I'll do the same thing, because part of what we do in our work, right, is we validate even the cheater. They have emotional reasons that drove them where they were.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotions they were feeling are valid. And so it's important that they get validated. And I've told clients, and I said, look, I can see how you got there. And I said, you still made a bad choice.
Mm-hmm.
You still had other things you could have done. You didn't have to cheat.
Right.
Because, like some of them, like I've had people say, like, I mean, what choice did I have? Well, to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, in short, with this topic, because I want to move on to the other ones too. I think
mm-hmm.
you're right. But in that respect, where it's like you chose to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and if they say what choice did I have, it's like lots of get divorced, or like. But
Right.
but I think what matters in this is for anybody who has gone through something like this, it does not mean your relationship is over. You can bounce back from infidelity. I shouldn't say bounce back. That's the wrong way to phrase it. It sounds almost passive. It takes a lot of work. And there are some books that I think you can get if that's something you're struggling with that are helpful. The one I mentioned earlier is by Snyder, Bauckham, and I can't remember the last guy, but it's called Getting Past the Affair.
Mm-hmm.
Just conversations to have and things to work through, and go talk to a therapist. Don't make the mistake of thinking a lot of people do. It's like, well, it's been like 4 years. We're over it now. Cause I've talked to people 10 years later and they're like, we still struggle with this, even though they think they don't anymore. So, it's because what you really need to do is go and look and say, hey, what got us here? That's what our issue is. We just wouldn't write that down on a piece of paper for a divorce.
Well, and I think too, like one thing to remember, right, is and this is the idea, this like what I thought of with bounce back, right, is the idea of like, yeah, we'll get back to where things were before the affair
Right.
or
Which you,
before things got bad. And you're never going back there.
well, and you shouldn't want to.
Right. But like this idea of like, we've all had people say, I just want it to be like it was before.
Right.
And it's like, okay, sorry, it's never going to be like that again.
Right.
Like this has created, like it raises trust issues.
Right.
And those are hard things to get past.
Eh,
It's doable. Like
right.
you said, it's a ton of work, but it's
And
doable. But
I
your relationship will be different going forward.
and I do believe, and this is not to say, thank goodness for the infidelity, but I do believe your relationship can be much better than it was,
Mm-hmm.
in different ways, but nothing
Yeah.
you've experienced before. It's going to be very different now.
Yeah.
Now, number 2, because we're going to keep on trucking. This one makes me laugh. Spending money foolishly. Now, there's a few reasons this make me laugh. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the top 3 reasons, at least this is kind of, I don't think that's officially research based, that top 3 reasons. It's maybe more anecdotal or whatever, but
Anecdotal.
the sex, money, and in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I talk about with clients with money is that money is a big deal because it represents safety and security. And so when somebody's messing with that, it feels, it's similar to infidelity. And this article mentions the idea of financial infidelity. What makes me laugh about it is I feel again like, well, that's not really the issue. There's something here. And this happens in most articles I read that are written by someone who is not systemically trained. So this talks about financial disagreements are a leading cause of marital problems, often exacerbated by one partner's irresponsible spending habits. When one spouse consistently makes financial decisions without consulting the other or disregards agreed upon budgets, it can lead to resentment, stress, and ultimately marital breakdown. Now, that is true, especially in the context of saying agreed upon budgets. I think what gets tricky is when you get down to places where it's like, if I really wanted to purchase something, but my partner did not approve of the price, I would consider buying it anyway and not telling them. The funny thing about that phrase to me is there is an implicit problem with the structure of the relationship, of the dynamic there. If you're saying, my partner would not approve of this, it suddenly says, so one of you is in charge and one of you is not. What if you, and is it, and I'm not trying to excuse financial irresponsibility. I'm super cheap. And so I'm lucky that my wife is somehow cheaper than me. And so she's more likely to be the one holding the purse strings. But the implication here is like, or what they're overlooking, I guess I should say, is that there's something here that says, okay, wait, how come this partner, in fact, this happened to me once. A couple came in and they were telling me about how they had, like, he kept having these secret credit cards, but he's confessed now and they just need to know how to move forward. And I said, we have to look at why you had those secret credit cards. And they were like, well, what are you talking about? I said, how come you weren't talking to her when you wanted to make decisions or buy things? Because that's a big issue to me. Like, if you're afraid of talking to your wife about, or your husband about, this is what I want to buy, that's a problem. Bigger to me than one of you wants to be financially irresponsible. Who decides what's being irresponsible? Now, if someone goes out and buys a boat and they have, $50,000 of debt already, I feel like, maybe don't go buy a boat.
Right.
But I don't know who decides that and the level that gets at. So it's another thing to me too, where it's like, yeah, you're overlooking a systemic dynamic, but the easily identifiable thing was, this one was the bad partner because they spent all the money. Whereas that same person who's the spender might actually, on their list of why we got divorced, write down, my partner was controlling. Yep. And it's not that partner's controlling, it's that they're super anxious. So I don't know that it's so cut and dried as like one's financially irresponsible, as much as it is it's saying something's off about the way you guys talk about money, which might come down to anxiety because of security and how the other person's, going to interfere with that. I don't know. Do you feel like this one comes up very often for you in sessions?
No. No.
Cool story, Hansel.
I mean, yeah, sorry. I can think of, like, I can think of a few people.
But it wasn't a presenting problem.
It wasn't a presenting problem. It took on greater. Yeah, but again, right? Like, it was symptomatic. Like, the fact that I'm buying this thing and we're not talking about it was simply symptomatic of what they were there for, which was, this guy felt like I've spent our entire marriage molding myself to be someone I'm not, and I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And so they started making purchases that were a reflection of, well, but these are the things I enjoy, so I'm doing it.
Yeah, it's asserting individuality or independence.
Right. But again, and so it kind of became an issue. But no, the issue was this idea of, like, they struggled with differentiation a lot. That was something we spent a lot of time talking about because it was hard for them. So, yeah. But as the thing that we deal with, I don't know that this has ever really come up.
Yeah. As a side note, this cracks me up. This part says, because of financial infidelity is a top cause of marital problems, researchers have created a financial infidelity scale. If you click on it, it leads to a page called the Financial Infidelity Scale, brought to you by Mark
Forbes.
Travers. Nope.
Oh,
Mark
really?
That's right. I just listened to the book Atomic Habits, which it's a very good book. It's got lots of really helpful tips. And actually, this isn't like it's self-serving, but also very helpful. He's always like, and you can find more about this on this website, which is my website. Like it's like, wow, way to promote yourself all the way through your book. All right. So here's what I would say about the financial infidelity thing. If that's happening, like if you are the irresponsible partner, quote unquote, or if you feel like your partner is always spending money, don't look and think, what is wrong with you? You have to be thinking, hey, how come we're not getting on the same page with this? Maybe there's something we need to understand about us and the way we're communicating. And even the sense of security and financial stability, and even the sense of control or power that comes from our financial discussions and how that needs to be addressed, rather than saying you're financially irresponsible.
Well, and a real quick shout out to YNAB, who our friend Ryan works for.
You need a budget.
Yeah, they have a book, and in the book it talks about, and it was one of the most beneficial conversations I think Jenner and I ever had regarding money was, like, what are the things that are important to you and why?
Yeah.
Right. So it was understanding, like, for Jenner, like, family vacations was a huge thing. Like, that was extremely important. And so kind of understanding that that's where her importance was, suddenly it shifted the way that I was looking at vacations, because vacations were a very different thing for me. But I was able to understand, like, oh, okay, I get why this is where you want money to go all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Like that,
it
that
changes
makes
the context
sense to me
yeah.
now. Yeah.
As a side note, I think, I know we talk about doing this all the time. I think these 6 topics we could make 6 episodes on. But
yeah, really,
I'm going to keep moving because it's already 2:35. So this one I think I'll be shorter on this one because I agree with this one. I'd like to say, I think the optimist in me wants to say, no, this isn't really going to be like a sign of divorce, but I feel like it tends to be, which is drinking and or drug use. And I'll say, obviously, excessive drinking, which is what they say, excessive drinking or drug use. When I've seen that, especially when it gets to the levels of like alcoholism or addiction, it is extremely hard for couples to come back from that. Usually, unless it's caught early and managed early and gone into recovery early, by the time the person finally reaches the point of recovery, it's often too late for the spouse who's given 15,000 chances and kept thinking this time will be the time. And finally, when it's like new, it's like, yeah, I see that this is new and I believe you, but I've already had to shut down so much that I'm all done.
Yeah. Well, and that's, and you can correct me because I know you've done a lot of work with, with substance abuse. But they talk about, right, like the individual that has the problem has to hit their rock bottom before they decide I'm going to make a change. Right. Like the decision has to be theirs. It's not going to stick if they're doing it for someone else. And the problem is that what you said, right? Like the individual's rock bottom is probably coming long after the spouse hit theirs.
Right.
The spouse probably hit theirs way before and was like, I can't, like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I don't have anything left for this.
Yeah. It's sad to me because when addictions occur, and what's hard about addictions or like alcoholism is that sometimes they've been there. It's like it was there the whole time and the other spouse just didn't know it. And so even when the person goes into recovery, it's like, oh, you're a totally different person now. And in many ways they are. And the other person's like, you're great, but this isn't what I want anymore.
Right.
But mostly it's I've been burned so many times and I mean, I have a handful of clients currently that it was like, they really did get sober and got into recovery and have been in recovery for 4 or 5 years. And right as they got out of like rehab and they're like starting their process and they're a totally different person and I can see it and their spouse can see it. Their spouse has said, yeah, it's too late. I've gone through so much. I can't look at you the same anymore. And so that one, I feel like I have worked with couples, to be clear, that they do make it through,
Mm-hmm.
and it works really well for them, in recovery. Stuff has to shift usually for both people, because they don't realize they both learn to function around the addiction or the substance, or the behavior. And so it does have to change for both people in the relationship. And often, if it's like, for example, severe alcoholism, um, that the person who stops drinking, the spouse also ends up stopping drinking, because it's like, I can't, if I'm around them, it's not cool for them to not drink, but I'm drinking in front of them. And so
Mm-hmm.
it can work. But I think this one it's a pretty big red flag to me, of like just directly saying, no, that one seems directly clear. I don't need to clarify a ton to say it does so much to the relationship, and is so damaging that it's really hard to come back from. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm plugging something for all these things, but if you got a problem, go get it taken care of, which, I mean, that's easy to say, because, and to clarify too, it is the recovery field, I think, kind of shies away from the rock bottom terminology now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because it does sound like, because maybe sometimes that's an excuse of like, well, I haven't hit rock bottom yet. I haven't killed anybody,
Right.
like,
Right.
um, but you are correct. It does have to be the person, from my experience, the person, these interventions that you see on TV, it's like they don't usually work. The times they do, it's because that person was already ready to do something. It really
Mm-hmm.
requires this person saying, I can't keep doing this. I have to do something else.
Yeah.
And
Which,
so a spouse saying, do it or I'll leave you, doesn't really do anything.
well, and that's the thing. That's a hard thing for a spouse, or right. Like I've run into it with parents. It's a hard thing for them to understand.
You know,
And a lot of times they'll internalize it and say, well, if they loved me, and I'm like,
right.
no, that's not it.
It's not the nature of how
One, they're
substance
not
abuse
thinking
works.
about you when they're making that decision.
Right.
But yeah.
So number 4, 5, and 6 crack me up. I'm gonna throw
Favorite. Oh,
I'm gonna
5 and
throw all
6.
yeah, I'm gonna throw all three out at once, because I feel like I don't want to get into a ton of these things directly. I just feel like these ones are weak.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think, to clarify something, when I say weak, I think, this research they've done, it's looking back through divorce records, as to what people cite as to the reasons for divorce, or interviewing and things like that. And what's funny about that is, you ask somebody why they got divorced, and the best answer, honestly, is it's really complicated. Um, Otherwise, you're going to say something like number 6, they have irritating habits, which
Mm-hmm.
feels like, who doesn't? Um,
Yeah.
so number 4 is jealousy. Number 5 is moodiness, which sounds like a dude writing it about his ex-wife, or a female saying he has an anger problem. And then number 6 was irritating habits. So these things all crack me up, because they're very they're very externally focused, and saying this person here is, in fact, all 6 of these are kind of, this person here did this, and that's why I can't make this happen, or why the divorce happened. It's
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of responsibility taken in any of these things. And that one's always very hard for me, because it feels like, well, now I'm justified in getting divorced, which is what people do, right? If you're going to do something
Right.
that
We
massive,
want to feel justified.
yeah, you have to feel like there's a reason why I did this. It wasn't just, I don't know, I think I was done. Because then you just sound like a
Which,
selfish jerk.
right. Which is why, right, we've also all sat across from people that would say things like, I just wish they had cheated.
Right. Because then I'd have a
Because
reason
in their
why
mind,
this,
if they've cheated, it's a
right,
clear cut, and everyone's going to look at it and be, well, of course you had to leave.
right. When,
Whereas
and,
the complicated things, they're harder to explain.
uh-huh. And I do think, like you mentioned, number 5, the moodiness thing. And I think there's some validity in some things in here. I shouldn't throw these out totally. Like, for example, Mood swings, whether caused by underlying mental health conditions or situational stress, can lead to frequent conflicts, emotional distancing, and difficulty in resolving disputes calmly. There is some validity in the idea that sometimes there are things going on for one partner or both that are so big emotionally that it's like we can't make any headway in these conversations we're having. I've seen that happen where
Yeah.
and I tell people like, hey, look, the most you can do, like I've worked with somebody, some people even recently where actually I think the male has borderline personality disorder. And that is characterized by what you could say moodiness, among other things, but there's lots of moodiness in there. And I think, we've talked about, hey, look, the mood is going to be unpredictable. You just be consistent in what you're saying and doing. But in the end, it's like this person in particular, it's so bad that it's like, it's so emotionally draining that it's just kind of sucking the life out of this person. And I'm not sure, I only see I see the individual, but after having seen the couple a while back, I wouldn't diagnose from a distance. When I say I think he has borderline personality, it's because I worked with him for a while. But I think it's so taxing. I feel like I don't know that there's a way out for you for this, especially because it seems to be getting worse as it goes along. So I don't mean to say that moodiness, like I think yes, there can be. These can be things that you could say this is going to cause problems in your relationship. But like this last one, irritating habits, like couples therapy, this says couples therapy often focuses on improving communication skills and negotiation strategies to address these problems constructively, fostering mutual understanding and compromise. Addressing problematic habits and behaviors can help prevent them from becoming entrenched sources of conflict that contribute to marital dysfunction and potentially divorce, which I can agree with. Like, hey, let's talk about these things. However, irritating habits feels like, is it actually an irritating habit, or are you just getting annoyed easily? Like
I was going to say, to me, that's a me problem.
right.
Like if someone has an irritating habit, the first person I have to look at is me. Why does that bother me so much?
Unless their irritating habit is walking up and flicking you in the ear every day,
Right.
But if it's like I leave my socks on the floor, it's like, okay, I can ask you, but maybe I need to get over this because what are my irritating habits?
Right.
I mean, that just sounds like these last three sound like we've gotten so broad that it's like anything can lead to divorce.
Which ironically is true. Anything can lead to divorce if that's the direction you choose to go with it.
Right. Yeah, none of these. I think what's dangerous about a list like this is when people read this. I think sometimes people feel like a good marriage or divorce are like out of their control.
Yeah.
Like you either have a good one or you don't.
Don't.
And I feel like, hey, I've told people many times, the only reason you'll get divorced is if you decide to get divorced. There's nothing that says, well, now you have to get divorced. You can work through basically, this is way too broad of a statement, but basically you can work through anything if you choose to. And it's not our job actually as therapists to say whether you should or shouldn't. That's for each person to individually decide. But if you choose to divorce, then any of these can be the deal breaker.
No, and that's like I've worked with couples where it becomes obvious in the first session or two that one of them is out or leaning out.
Yeah.
Right. And so we'll talk with them and, like I'll usually do an individual session to kind of gauge to see that I'm right. Because I don't want to start saying that kind of thing out loud if that's not where they are.
Right.
And so I'll usually meet individually with them to kind of see and make sure that I'm seeing the right things. And if they are, then I we'll often say to them, like, look, it takes two of you to make this work. It takes one of you to end it. Like if one of you is out, that's it. One of you's out. I can't make it work if one of you isn't in.
Yeah. That's my job is not to make the other person fall back in love with you.
Right. Well,
There's things I can
and
do that are
then
exercise that may help with that, but
right. And then like I'll often tell people, as we kind of the few times it's happened, it hasn't happened often, but the few times it's happened where they'll say, "Hey, can you kind of help us? Like we've decided we're going to divorce. Can you kind of help us through the next few steps?" And I'll say, "Yeah, sure, we can, a couple of sessions to kind of look at some things." And I said, "If at any point you guys decide you're back in, then let's go."
right.
Like this, right? Even once you've made that decision to divorce, I think, no, you can still choose to say, no, I think we can make this work.
Yeah. And people do all the time. That's actually one of the reasons why they created discernment counseling, which is designed to help you figure out, am I going to work on this or not?
Yeah.
Or there's a book that one of my, one of my good buddies and then another colleague, I guess we'll say, used to work on a research group with me, Alan Hawkins and Steve Harris. Steve Harris, who we've had on the podcast, Beef.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think I'm drawing a blank on the third author, but they wrote a book called Should I Work It Out? Kind of helping you read through like, hey, should you or shouldn't you? I think part of the spoiler in that is because they're all pro relationship, not even necessarily pro marriage. It's like, yeah, generally we probably should. I mean, there's plenty of research. I have a book over on my shelf that talks about the 25-year legacy of divorce and the impacts of divorce. And this is not to say that anyone should stay married at all costs, not at all. Because there are cases where I think,
right.
hey, that may be a really healthy option for you. But we are humans are relationally oriented, as even when we try to say we're not. Plenty of people do at the end of a divorce, and they're like, well, I'm never getting in a relationship. I think I'll see you in 3 years when you're in another relationship.
Yeah.
Because it's just what we're programmed to do. But I think often, like these 6 things, one of the things I wondered about when I said, what are we going to do with this today, was thinking, I hope people know that when you read stuff like this, sometimes it's phrased like, uh-oh, I have those. And the nature of humans at this point is we get so worried thinking, oh, crap, I don't know if we can recover from this. The answer is you can. It may take a ton of work. In some of these situations like infidelity, or if there's been violence in the relationship, or alcohol, substance abuse, like these are massive things. In many ways, it's like that's going to take a lot of work. But I have, and so has you, Mike, and so has Matt. We've worked people through to a point where it's like they've come to a much better spot. So you can work through it. It's kind of a decision sometimes of like, well, do you want to? Because sometimes it's a very painful with no guarantees. Because you could work through it, and then that spouse could cheat again. And so there aren't guarantees, and that's the hard part about this. And that's, but what I think when I read these kinds of articles, I feel like don't write it like that. That feels like, even though he says may end in divorce, that feels like it's going to. You're heading that direction, and I don't want people to lose hope like that. I think it should, especially irritating habits. He just basically said every marriage may end in divorce, which is true, I guess. But moodiness, like I think those happen in every relationship.
Right. It's part of, I think, what makes the intimacy of a romantic, for lack of a better phrase, relationship unique is there is always the risk.
Right. Yeah.
Like people will talk about, well, but I want to be sure. Guess what? You're never sure.
Right. You can only be so sure.
Like at the end of the day, no, there's always the possibility that they're going to cheat, that they're going to do something, and you're going to say, this was a mistake. And okay. That's where the power of that vulnerability comes to me, is because it's saying, hey, I don't know where this ends, but let's get into it. Right. Like let's go do this thing together. It is. And that's like, to me, with this article, I think, someone's going to find this who Googles, should I get divorced?
Right.
And especially when they hit 4, 5, and 6, they're going to be like, well, 3 out of 6, I got to get divorced.
Right.
That's like,
My husband drives me nuts. Yeah, well, I tell people all the time, I was like, well, then if you don't want that, then don't be in a relationship, not even married. It's like, don't get in a relationship with somebody hoping that we'll never be annoyed at each other. You're going to be annoyed all the time. You're going to do tons of stupid stuff. And that's part of the growth process, which is actually the thing I didn't do that I said I might do while I was gone. I was going to wander around Morgan's wedding with my microphone and ask people, why do we get married?
Yeah.
I wanted to know what people had to say, but it felt like work. And it was my first day on vacation. I was like, I do not want to do any work today. So I didn't do any of it.
And so instead we had
I know,
podcast.
No show. It's my fault somehow.
It's all Rob's
Rob
fault.
takes vacation and everything falls apart. But
good news, the patron saint of Manspace got after me. He's like, we could have done a Mike only episode.
Oh yeah, Mike, why didn't we? So
because someone was going to record.
Come back next time and maybe we'll have a Mike only episode. We won't, but maybe next time on the Manspace. Star Wars, if they should. Star Wars, please let the Star Wars stay.